Are the Dogs going to go undefeated in 2022? That's what Las Vegas wants to know. They're ready to take your money. It's actually not a crazy bet. Some people are taking it too. Georgia is listed right now out in Las Vegas for their over and under at 11.5. That mean I've never seen that before for Georgia. That means that they are at a point where people think they legitimately could go undefeated and they're willing to take money on it. I'm going to talk about that and a lot more right now. So stick with me as we get through this. There's a lot of these teams I'm going to talk about. More than anything, though, the Dogs. You're starting to talk about an 11.5 over under. They only play 12 games. So, of course, this is based on the regular season. And I just am always to the point where I think they're going to lose a game in the regular season. But that didn't happen in 2021, did it? But I think, in this case, when you look at their schedule, and you start with the Oregon game, which is a home game. I think perhaps a tougher game for Oregon to play in Atlanta in that dome. That is probably the toughest or second most difficult game that Georgia will play this season. I think the game at Kentucky will be tricky. I think that Tennessee and Athens could be tricky. But, when you're talking about you got to beat Kentucky as your most difficult game in the league, I think you'd take that most years. I think you take that every year. So that's just what it is. And I think they're going to go undefeated, but I just know I'm not going to put money on it, right? That's my thing about all of this. But look, I think we've just entered a new era here with the Dogs. And when you start thinking about what they accomplished in 2021, make sure you're picking up DAWGSTRUCTION. The link is below if you're watching on a lot of places. But if you're not, just type in DAWGSTRUCTION in Google and we'll make it work. If you want to see it live, go to Red Zone on Clayton Street in Athens. That's the only places you can get it in stores. So it's a little tricky to say, these guys will win a national well, it's not talking about winning the national championship, right? It's talking about going 12-0, which I think is totally possible. I meet a lot of people. Folks just stop me and then want to talk about the Dogs, which is great. No problem for me. And there's going to be a lot of winning that goes on here from here on out for Georgia for the near future. We don't know what 2, 3, 4 years from now will hold, but this team is loaded up. And they lost a lot of guys for sure, but they're loaded up in a way that most other programs are not. And as it turns out, unlike 3 times last season, they're not playing teams that people consider elite. You got to remember, Georgia bookended their season starting against Clemson and beating them, and ending with Alabama and beating them. They beat Alabama worse. They did. But the Georgia that played at the end of the season was not the Georgia that started the season on a lot of different levels, right? But I do think 11.5 is an adventurous moment to have. Alabama is listed at 11, which I think probably shows that they play in the West. Because 11.5, that's Clemson type stuff from years gone by in the ACC. Clemson's sitting at 10. I think that's more indicative of Clemson regressing a little bit than the league slightly getting better than anything else. I think the problem for Clemson is going to be their offense. I think when you look at Alabama, that's a really good team that has the best quarterback in college football coming back, right? In theory, right? The guy at Ohio State's pretty good too, but returning Heisman Trophy winner, you've got arguably the best or second best defensive player in the country. That's a pretty good way to start with things. The question for Alabama is, with as rough as the West can be, not all games are created equal, but everybody's going to be giving Alabama their best shot. Everybody's going to be giving Georgia their best shot. Everybody's going to do that with Clemson in the ACC. The question is, for the Dogs, is that going to catch up with them? It did last season with Alabama losing to Texas A&M. But And Alabama survived a lot of games last season. Let's not act like they didn't, right? I mean, they obviously they lost to Texas A&M, they lost to Georgia, but in the regular season, they did not play well against Tennessee. They did have to survive LSU. Needless to say, they had to survive Auburn. They might not have survived Auburn had it not been for a couple of different things, but they did. So I think 11 is probably, a good spot to be in. I do think Alabama, there's a reason why they are the number one team in the country coming in. Well, we don't have rankings yet, but they are the odds. They are the favorite but they're not the favorite by a ton to win the national championship. But there's an explanation for that. I'm going to roll through the rest of these real quick. Mississippi State 6.5, Miami, the Canes at 8.5. Now that's a team that Clemson has to deal with this season, and I don't think Clemson has had to play Miami in the regular season a ton, but this year they actually do get them. So that's why you see probably both those teams with that Clemson's close is tough, man. That's not an ideal. They should probably win all those games except the Notre Dame game. But anyway, let's see. You've got Mizzou at 5, Florida State at 7.5. It's a little bit ambitious, I would say. Vanderbilt at 2.5. Ooh. Alabama at 11, LSU at 7, Auburn at 6.5, Carolina at 5.5. That might be a little low, but okay. The Gators at 7, the Hogs at 7, Texas A&M at 8.5. Curious. Georgia Tech at 3. Ooh. Kentucky 8.5. Okay. Tennessee's at 7.5. They basically play the same schedule except Tennessee plays Alabama. The Rebels are at 7.5. I already talked about. Clemson at 10. The ones that jump out to me actually are Georgia Tech at 3. I mean that's bad because they don't play anybody. And then Kentucky at 8.5. So let's talk about just Tech for a second. How are you that bad? I mean, how are you in that bad a situation if you're the Jackets? I mean, that just, you can't be in that situation. I don't know if I see a lot of wins. I mean, they open with Clemson. They should lose that game pretty solidly, but Clemson didn't play well last year against Tech. They're not going to lose to Georgia Tech. I mean, no, Dabo should not be fired if they lose to Georgia Tech. They have lost to some bad teams while he's had really good teams at Clemson. But he should be ashamed of himself if he loses that game. I mean, that's pitiful. Western Carolina, they'll win. Then they play Ole Miss. They're not winning that game. They play at Central Florida. They're probably not winning that game. They play at Pitt. Nope. Duke, okay, maybe. New coach. Virginia, Florida State, no. Virginia Tech, no. Miami, no. At North Carolina, no, probably not. But, okay. At Georgia, no. So you got some issues there if you are the Jackets. But what else is new for the Cats? You start looking at 7.5. 8.5. Miami of Ohio probable win. The Gators, I would say probable win, even though it's on the road. Youngstown State, Northern Illinois. At Ole Miss, no. Carolina at home, yes. Mississippi State, yes. At Tennessee, I'm not giving you that one. At Mizzou, I'm going to give you that one. Vanderbilt, yes. Georgia, no. Louisville, yes. I got them at 9, which is probably too generous. But they're at 8.5. I mean, I think the swing game for them are the Gators. Right? And that's, I hear a beep. That means someone has just bought a book. Thank you very much. I don't think I've mentioned this. Okay, make sure I did. Make sure you're picking up DAWGSTRUCTION. The link is down below. And thanks to everybody for who's getting these. I am getting to the point where I'm kind of running out of those books. I'm going to have to order more, and that takes a little bit of time. So make sure that you're getting it now while you can. Kentucky, I don't mind that. And then let's just check out the Vols real quick. It's 7.5. Ball State at Pitt, Akron, Gators at LSU. Man, they got LSU and Alabama in back-to-back weeks. They got 3 of 4 games against the Gators, off LSU and Alabama. Almost equally as tough back-to-back. You can laugh if you want to. That's Kentucky and Georgia in back-to-backs. I don't like that schedule a lot. They close with Mizzou, at Carolina, and Vandy. So those are all, you could string those three together. If you start the season 4-0, which Tennessee totally could, and you survive to get to either 4-2 or 5-1, that means they're going to be a pretty good team coming into their late season stretch with Kentucky and the Dogs. But I think they're at 7.5 appropriately. Ole Miss hanging out where they're at. Florida State at 7.5 is another curious one. They're not great. Their problem is they play LSU this season. That game right there is going to tell us a lot about where both those programs are. Brian Kelly should have the ability with a quarterback. They've got quarterbacks at LSU now all of a sudden. I don't know when that started, but they do. And, if he can win that game, LSU is in a position where the start of the season is not that bad. I mean, Florida State, Southern, Mississippi State, New Mexico, and then they play at Auburn. Those are all winnable / should win games. You build up momentum, you get to 5-0, and you host Tennessee. That's going to be a tough one. And then they go to the Gators. All right, so that back-to-back with a third of Ole Miss, I mean, it gets really tough in the middle for LSU. Just physically speaking, I mean, you're dealing with Auburn, Tennessee, Florida, Ole Miss, at Alabama, and then you play the Hogs. The West is tough, man. I mean, that's just like not a lot of fun. But I think, to me, when you get back to the Georgia situation, yes, they should win every game that they play. But stringing together 12 consecutive wins is not easy. And for Georgia to do it, there are some situations you got to watch. Oregon, obviously. Kentucky, Tennessee. You always got to deal with Auburn and the Gators. It's not a tough schedule. I mean, when you consider last season that Georgia played Alabama twice, Clemson, Michigan, the Gators, Auburn, Tennessee. I mean, they had a lot of games that were challenging. They didn't lose any of them until Atlanta. And in this case, we're only talking about the regular season. I think 12 is totally possible, but that the indicator is 11.5. I mean, that tells you really where Las Vegas thinks Georgia will be.